I'm Big Don Luka, smoke you like my hookah. Pump fake right, then I step back in illusion. That's a boss move maneuver, billionaire entrepreneur. Mark Cuban on the viewer, put you rookies on a skewer. I stay shitting on you boys like I came up from the sewer. Used to have a lot of dollars, now I got a lot fewer. What you saying to me? I hope you save it for me. I'm about to kill the game, and I put it in my testimony.
Hi, welcome to the Mainstream Mavs podcast. This is your host, Will. I'm joined here in person by my co-host, Jaren.
What is up, guys?
We are back today to cover Kyrie Irving's season in review this past year for the Dallas Mavericks, of course, the 2022-2023 season. We won't be going over the entirety of his season when he played for the Brooklyn Nets, of course, but, those last 30 so or odd games, we will be getting over. Kyrie will be rounding out all of our player season in reviews for this past year. And then we'll be moving on to draft profiles, which we have a few of those cranked out coming tomorrow. So grinding out some content, of course, as the draft is on the horizon. We have big plans for the draft, Jaren. Do you want to inform everybody?
We are planning on doing a live stream. That'll be our first ever live stream, I do believe. We had one more attempt at that at last year's draft, but that didn't go too well. And of course, we hadn't had a page really built up. So this will be our first real attempt. And I hope you guys tune in. And I'm glad that we're saying this on the intro. That way we might get some of y'all in and watching that. And we're honestly looking really forward to it. I guess by the time this will be put up, it'll be 12 days away, the draft.
So we'll be 12 days away as of currently, June 10th. We're recording this at like 12 a.m. So just crossed the night, but that will be up here soon. Jaren, I think that, we're more Twitch type of guys compared to how am I bluffing on this? What's the
YouTube live stream?
No, the live stream that everybody uses, Discord.
Oh, Discord.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I feel like we're more Twitch type of guys. What do you think?
I would actually agree.
I
would we probably should look into opening up a Twitch account.
Yeah,
for big events.
So we'll get that social, of course, in our handle, and you can see it on the YouTube podcast, and we'll try to blare it all out there once we get it all figured out. But 10 or 12 days away, rather, we're still figuring out the intricacies and workarounds of that, of course. But other than that, we'll be getting into some of the, rumors that have kind of surfaced over the last week or so in regards to this whole, Kyrie Irving, LeBron drama sort of thing, where Kyrie Irving reportedly, per, I believe, was it?
I think it was Chris Haynes.
Chris Haynes, yeah. And I think maybe even Jake Fisher or Woj may have said something that he is trying to will LeBron to the Mavs. But I mean, we, obviously there's a lot of smoke coming at this juncture of the year. And, I think a lot of Mavs fans on Twitter got that narrative and sort of, definitely sort of ran with it, especially after all the rumors started surfacing up of Kyrie throughout this NBA playoffs, where he's been going to some Suns and Lakers games and, dapping up with some old teammates. There's been a lot of smoke. It's been kind of hard to sift through all these rumors to, just because there has been a lot of conflicting stuff from national media, pretty, accredited guys here. This is just what happens when you have a guy of Kyrie's status of, a superstar like that. Things are just going to pop up. So we kind of wanted to let some of these rumors build up before we fully glossed over them and fully kind of talked about what we do think is and isn't true. We're gonna keep it realistic, and we'll use logistical data and things of that nature to back up what our opinion is here. But that's not to say that we can't be wrong. Of course, something could happen, and the validity of these rumors could come into fruition, and LeBron James could become a Maverick. So we'll go a little more in depth into as we get in the podcast. But you never know. I think that's one thing we can definitely say after watching the NBA, especially these last couple of years. It definitely,
especially this playoff series.
Yes, the NBA as a brand is definitely starting to fit the slogan of the early 2010s, where amazing happens. But conversely, there's also a lot of bullshit that persists in the sports. It's basically it's like one of those magazines that you pick up, specifically talking more so, the early 2000s, and half of it will be like supermodels and all that sort of stuff, and then there's a bunch of just countless advertisements that nobody wants to read. That's essentially what the NBA is right now.
Pretty much.
Yeah. So other than that, we're excited to get into this podcast, of course, and especially when we get cranking on these draft profiles here in the coming podcast. But before we can do all that, of course, we have our good friends over at Anchor. They're going to bless us with this sponsorship. All right, Jaren. So getting into it, sifting through the wide array of rumors that the national media has put on for us these last couple weeks, starting with that report by Chris Haynes that Kyrie would be keen on trying to, maybe solicit LeBron's appearance in a Dallas Mavericks uniform. This obviously came about last week. A lot of Mavericks fans on Twitter were very hyped up about this. Do you think that this situation is illegitimate, or is there some smoke to this?
I mean, look, like I'm looking at the situation. I'm not viewing it more as, is LeBron coming to Dallas? Is Draymond Green coming to Dallas? I'm more so looking at this like, it clearly looks like Kyrie's happy here. He's trying to recruit other players to come here, come play in Dallas with him. And I think that's, more so to me what sticks out. Now, granted, it would be amazing and it would be absolutely life-changing if LeBron James or even Draymond Green for that matter came and they were wearing a white and blue jersey. But, the likelihood of that happening, at least this year or even next year for that matter, is very, very unlikely. Now, like I said, that would be amazing. And, I love seeing the sort of edits that people are making with LeBron and Mavericks jerseys, but I'm not going to take too much credence to that, especially the LeBron remarks. But, however, that being said, to me, like I said, what sticks out is, Kyrie seems to be pretty happy here. I think once he gets the right dollar amount, he should, or he might resign. It's never a no it's never a 100% with Kyrie Irving. You can just never say that. So I think it's all likelihood, possible that he will resign, especially after those sort of comments. But, to me, I think that the sort of recruiting that Kyrie Irving can do this offseason might benefit the Mavericks extremely, especially, I think that there's a number of guys in this league who would love to play with Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic for that matter. So I don't think it'll be, necessarily a hard sort of setting the hook scenario on these sort of superstars. I think it's whether, the Mavericks are going to pull the trigger on it. So I think I think Kyrie for that matter will do his due diligence and sort of, I guess, recruiting offseason guys to the team.
Yeah, I think that was the best way you definitely could encapsulate the situation, right? Because Kyrie can, by virtue of him, he can extend his grace to other superstar players in the league and, try to do recruiting, as hopefully we can get Luka to do one day, even though that's, a tougher bridge for some of the European superstars to do that with American superstars. But that's obviously, attributes in today's NBA that are, just widely applicable by most stars nowadays. And you are right that, a lot of that smoke on stuff like that doesn't end up coming to fruition, especially when it's prompted by players, and we're looking at a guy here in LeBron that, is still under contract for the Lakers. This would have to be a pretty extensive trade here. Do you even think the Mavericks would have the wherewithal to be able to make a trade of this magnitude without including Luka Doncic, or obviously Kyrie Irving in this instance, based on most of these reports and his willingness to play with LeBron and that rekindling seeming like it means something in some sort of fashion this offseason, whether it be Kyrie joining the Lakers or at least reaching out to see if LeBron could facilitate something to come to Dallas. Do you think it's even a possibility that this could happen if, LeBron just, I do think that it would take LeBron literally like listing Dallas as a trade target destination, that he wants to go there. He wants to reunite with Bronny once the Mavericks miraculously keep their pick in the 2024 NBA draft. They do have that pick, right?
That's given to New York now that we have our pick, I believe.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. So it would be our 2020. Considering that we likely are to no, we can trade the 2025 pick, not just because of the Stepien rule, and the 2024 pick being out the door to the Knicks. The 2025 pick is not applicable to be traded until the draft.
Okay.
We just can't trade it in advance.
Okay.
So we still do have it in our back pocket if that comes around, and maybe Bronny. He's feeling a little frisky, stays an extra year at USC. Never know what could happen.
You never know. And you do bring up a good point. What kind of package would the Mavericks have to give the Lakers in order to bring LeBron James to Dallas? And, personally, I do think that there is a world where they keep Luka and they keep Kyrie on that same roster while bringing LeBron. But I think that more so, does Dallas want to give up their whole future? Would they want to give up Josh Green, Jaden Hardy, probably 3 first-round picks, the 3 that we do have, including this year's? And I just don't think that the Mavericks would even consider that as a trade possibility, especially with the fact that Luka's so young in superstar world, that I just don't think that they'd really consider that. And I really don't think that we're gonna blow too much smoke into this. Of course, I think that this has been talked about enough, but LeBron James coming to Dallas would be amazing, as we said before, but I just don't think that there is a possible trade. If you're trying to keep Luka and you're trying to keep Kyrie on this team, there probably is not going to be a trade that exists where you're not giving up 3 first-round picks and your whole entire future on top of it.
All right, I'm going to try breaking the bank here to see if the Lakers would even accept this, okay?
Okay. So I'm Rob Palika?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, all right. Tim Hardaway Jr., Davis Bertans, Jaden Hardy, Josh Green, and the 2027 first round pick, a few pick swaps. I guess that's a true, and the 10th pick, of course.
I mean,
once it's like applicable to be traded, I think it has to be like a couple months until like after free agency. But of course, in this instance, if we were just bringing LeBron here, this would have to be obviously a pretty quick endeavor unless it somehow happened later in the summer. So it could be a draft night thing. Do you think that could get the deal done?
I think that has probably be under consideration. I'm not all fully encompassed in what the Lakers sort of cap scenario might look like if that were to be at all applicable. I'm not sure if they would be saving anything or like maybe looking forward to free agency if that were the case.
I personally don't think they would even consider
I don't think that.
It's just the magnitude of LeBron, what he would.
Yeah, LeBron in LA, I think is probably
despite
too
his
big
age
of a figure. The only thing that I think would sort of constitute even looking at that is the number of picks that were going to be given. Again, I know you said 2
pick swaps
in the pick swaps.
If there was a third team that got involved, maybe. We're chomping at the bits here.
We're general managers here.
Yeah.
So.
But you have to kind of chomp at the bits to even get a package that would be even worth considering. So look, I do think that the rumors are cool, and the one thing that I will take credence from amidst all of this is probably the fact that we have an individual in Kyrie, especially if he does stay, that is out there actually, at least, maybe the reports could be fake. I don't know, but this is a guy who has good relationships with many players amongst the league, regardless of the off-court perception of him. It's always been predicated on some of his individual sort of dwellings rather than, how he has been as a teammate and how other people perceive him. And most of the guys that he plays with tend to like him on a personal level. There's obviously the basketball questions, maybe when Kyrie left the Cavs, things like that. But on a personal level, almost everybody tends to, really like this guy. So to have an asset like that, especially, a guy that is spearheading your franchise if he does stay, is huge for the Mavericks because, in Luka, they don't necessarily even have that yet. And who knows when, would they even have another number 2 to do that. Now, obviously Kyrie is 31, but even to have that as a bridge in this generation till maybe one of their younger players could develop or they could get another all-star in the next few years is big for the franchise.
No, absolutely. I think, of course, signing Kyrie is of the utmost importance this offseason. And again, as we mentioned before, and I'm sure as many of you have thought, I do think, me personally, I'm viewing this more as a sort of Kyrie wants to be here sort of scenario rather than LeBron's coming to Dallas. I know, like I said, it's cool and all, especially with the distraction, or I guess that being the distraction from the NBA finals or the playoffs. Like I said, no, it was the finals at that time. I just think it's more so cool to get our name out. But like I said, I'm viewing this more as a Kyrie is enjoying his time in Dallas. He's looking to get some of his friends, some of his former work colleagues, some of his teammates into Dallas, into a Mavericks uniform. And I think, even
if unrealistic.
Yeah, absolutely. LeBron, I think, is probably the most unrealistic option you could choose. Maybe outside of
Giannis.
Or like a Jokic or something like that. I think that's probably on par with those guys. And that's why, I'm not taking too much credence into LeBron James coming to Dallas. But again, I think that there is some sort of future scenario where, assuming Kyrie does resign, I don't know what that dollar figure would look like. We'll probably see that more cleared up, more sort of talked about as soon as that comes, closer to time and fruition. But I do think that there is a future where maybe there are some guys, maybe, LeBron, maybe not LeBron necessarily, but some guys under that that would consider coming to Dallas because of the namesake of Kyrie Irving and Luka Doncic. And I really do believe that, especially with, I mean, heck, Kyrie's doing his work right now. He's trying to recruit LeBron James come to Dallas too. I mean, there's a number of things to say here. So that's why, I'm viewing this more as Kyrie's wanting to be in Dallas. He's wanting to bring his friends, I guess, along. And yeah, I mean, I couldn't be more happier if I'm in that department. And again, there's no 100% guarantee that he's going to resign, but with all assumptions that we can make from this sort of breaking news or sort of, distraction from the finals, that's how I'm going to view it.
Yeah, no, I mean, the validity of these things also has to be taken into account because we don't know how true any of this is, like I kind of stated, but, it definitely was nice to, kind of throw a left hook at all the rumors that had persisted throughout the playoffs after Kyrie had, been at all these opposing teams' arenas, watching games, staffing up other players. I think everybody just sort of pre-assumed that because of, the lack of a huge market here in Dallas, it was just another stop in a bountiful career for Kyrie, and he was ready to move on to bigger, better and brighter endeavors now that he gets to go to a team of choice in a sign and trade scenario, or just within cap, he'll be absorbed within cap space from the teams that actually have it, which is the very slim, a select few teams. So I think everybody was kind of already penciling that in as what was going to happen, once they started saw the playoffs rolling. So to see the level-headedness of, Kyrie, he seemed to have enjoyed his time here. He has not said anything definitively, nor on the record that he is going to stay in Dallas or like wants to be in Dallas for sure going forward. He definitely strayed away from doing so when he was here, but he, all the vibes definitely seem good. And, all kind of reports that are, not definitive or anything like that. All the rumors are pointing in the right direction. And, especially from Mark Stein, who's a close, Dallas confidant, of course, used to report, I believe, for the Dallas Morning News, and now is on the national stage, doing his own thing. He obviously has been pretty adamant that there's a fairly high likelihood that Kyrie will resign. So, I mean, from that perspective, things are looking pretty good. Now, there are obviously a few sign and trade scenarios that, could persist this summer if Kyrie is to seek other ventures. And I mean, he's even said as much on his Instagram live that, he's still considering his options, and we'll go more, we'll talk about the team specifically, I guess, if you just want to get into it right now. But, we may make some fake trades over the offseason if anything starts to kind of really heat up in that category. It may not warrant a whole pod quite yet, but it's something that we'll talk about. But I know there's been lots of things with the Suns and the Lakers, obviously. And I mean, a package from the Lakers, it would have to probably, spearhead one of their young players and then multiple draft assets, in my opinion, because I don't think that they have any young player that's so intriguing, in my opinion, that would, warrant me, bringing that guy on and, kind of lessening, conversely, some of the draft capital that the Lakers would have to send back. I still think, especially the way Kyrie handled himself, I think he did, not depreciate, but, he appreciated a little bit in his value after those last 30 games or so in Dallas. So, I think it would be a pretty hefty package, and the Mavericks would be fairly well off if they were to negotiate a sign and trade. I don't know the ramifications of it, if it would make them hard capped or what all they could pull off. I'd have to really fire up the trade machine, as we'll do that as we get closer to free agency, of course. And, obviously there's the whole Suns and Ayton rumor, but, nonetheless, I wouldn't say that Kyrie is strangleheld into having, to be in a sign and trade from, if he's wanting to go to another team of his choosing, because teams can clear cap. We saw it with the Knicks last year, close, as they approached the draft, and they just did a full array of moves and got cap space opened up, and they were able to sign Jalen Brunson. So, if something starts heating up in terms of what the Lakers or the Suns are doing this offseason, keep your eyeballs on the next 2 weeks to see what happens, because especially with that whole Chris Paul scenario.
And it would happen in the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, with him being waived, or if there's a trade partner there, if something ends up clearing up. But as of right now, the Mavericks do have a little bit of a blanket of security from the standpoint that only really non-contenders have cap space right now.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, like I said, like you said, actually, just keep your eyes open, because again, the one team to me that I think has a legit move or a legit shot at that is Phoenix. Again, there's those rumors that Chris Paul was waived, and I believe he in fact was not. But again, those are real rumors, and I do expect that to happen either closer to draft or post draft.
If they can't find a trade.
If they can't find a trade.
Yeah.
And, the whole DeAndre Ayton saga, I think if they're looking to unload Ayton, I think likely it'd have to be in a sign and trade with Dallas, or they just look to trade Ayton and get off that contract completely. Yeah. And then that makes them real suitors, in my opinion, actual suitors for a potential Kyrie signing.
Yeah, no. And needless to say, if there somehow was some sort of Chris Paul direct Kyrie swap, I can rest assured to Mavs fans, I would at least hope that in that scenario, Nico Harrison would be gaining back some substantial draft capital from the Suns or another team. I don't know exactly what the Suns can expel after they essentially emptied the brigade in the Kevin Durant trade. But any sort of asset that they do have, I guess we're looking at Josh Okogie.
Yeah,
right. Terrence Ross makes his actual Mavericks debut. I'm sure that they may have to get a third team involved if they just were to do a trade or something like that with Chris Paul. And I'm sure the Mavericks would have to be taking more back in that instance because Chris Paul has a 7-year age gap between Kyrie and is obviously, I think we could probably say definitively a worse player at this stage in his career, even though he can still definitely contribute on a championship team in the right scenario.
Absolutely. And I mean, I don't mean to be dragging this conversation on, but I think the Lakers would be a legit sort of suitor for Chris Paul, and that's all I'll say.
No, yes, I think that if anything is the welcoming that Lakers fans may get this offseason,
and I'm okay with that. Yes. I'm okay with Chris Paul.
They need that real floor general. They've been trying to seek it in free agency the last few years. They tried their hand at Rondo, but point LeBron in LA, needless to say, might be on the out, Jaren.
It could be on the out. We could see him landing his bags in Dallas, but
yeah,
that'll be a pod probably a year from now. So
yeah, I know, but we definitely wanted to hash out the rumors at least get our thoughts on them. I don't want to be too clickbaity in terms of our podcast because we do feel like these are not illegitimate, but they just have a very small likelihood of happening just because of all the other moving parts that have to occur for this to happen. But it's not out of the realm of possibility. As we said at the beginning of the pod, it is the NBA, so we'll just have to see what happens. But it'll be interesting to see going forward. Nonetheless, so Jaren, if you wanted to actually get into the real topic at hand here, the Kyrie Irving season interview for the Mavericks. I don't know the exact amount of games that Kyrie played this past season for the Mavericks. Perhaps we'll look it up real quick just to get a definitive answer on this because we wouldn't want to just leave you guys hanging. So Kyrie Irving this past season, see what Basketball Reference has for us here.
We love our boys.
He ended up playing 60 games total, 20 of which were with the Mavericks. So he only played 20 games with the Mavericks this past year. It's actually shorter than I expected, Jaren. I earnestly thought it would be around like 30 or so. But taking into account that he was resting a couple of those, some of the last games in the regular season there with the Mavericks, leading the brigade, taking out all the, attempting to take out the Western Hemisphere with their tanks.
With their tanks,
Yes, they were, it was a World War II-esque scenario in which the Mavericks were Nazi Germany, spearheaded by, I don't even want to go there in terms of the comparison I was going to make, but it was all jokes, guys. None of this is serious. Just pretend that mainstream Mavs. We're also trying to bolster our comedy career.
We are absolutely. So, we're a striving stand-up comedians in the Austin, Texas realm. I'm just playing. We're not actually in Austin, but
everything's a joke. Nothing's real.
Absolutely.
Anyways, guys, to get back to the topic on hand, with Kyrie and his past season, Jaren, in those 20 games from Dallas, once the initial shock had sort of settled down and you were really able to microanalyze this individual's game and his effect on the basketball court, what did you see from him in his time in Dallas from an on-court perspective, on both sides of the ball in those 20 games?
May I say, Kyrie Irving is the most talented basketball player I've ever seen. I will stand by that. I know some may disagree, but after seeing those 20 games in a Mavericks uniform, I really didn't understand his game up until I saw him pretty much for the first time against the Clippers. And I think that's, about as real as it gets. Kyrie Irving, an amazing basketball player, of course, we all knew.
So when you say you didn't understand.
Well, I just never, I didn't watch it on a nightly
Yeah.
basis. Like I got to really indulge. I mean, again, it was only 20 games. Doesn't sound like a whole lot, but it felt, as you said, it felt like more like 30, and I would second that. And yeah, I mean, I think that we got a pretty good dosage of what, Kyrie and what Luka could possibly look like, that duo itself. But yeah, I mean, from just the Kyrie perspective, I really enjoyed it from what we saw. I think a real leader. I mean, and I think that we can confidently say that a guy who can, of course, handle the ball at, pretty much an A+ sort of grade. And he's a great teammate. I think, whenever you think of Kyrie, you think of all the amazing layups, all the amazing shots he made. Game 7, pretty much winning that game for the Cavaliers. After that, of course, amazing LeBron block. But you think about all the sort of self accomplishments that he's done, or the sort of solo accomplishments that he's had. But he's a great teammate, not just from a mental perspective, but also from a facilitating perspective. He's a great playmaker. He got a lot of guys open. Unfortunately, the Mavericks didn't shoot the ball all too amazing this season from the 3-point line, but there was the high volume of shots that were there. And a lot of times they were created by his drives. They were created by his sort of kick out effect that he brings on this team. And I think that's, more so one of the things that I saw most was just the effect that he can bring the defense just has to focus on him so much that there's going to be an open shooter no matter what. Even whenever Luka and Kyrie are on the floor at the same time, possibly even one of those two could be open at one point in that sort of trifecta, or that, I guess, that sort of duo effect. And yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing that stuck out to me. It was just how amazing of a teammate he was, how his ability to dribble the ball pretty much just sort of sucks in the D, for lack of better terms, and creates just so many open shots. And on the defensive end, I think a lot stuck out to me. We had Spencer Dinwiddie before we replaced him with Kyrie Irving, of course, and I forget what sort of data it was, but something basically said that Spencer Dinwiddie was a very net negative defender from pretty much every category.
There's a lot of data coming out.
There is,
February.
Yeah, but
and we tried to give him his due diligence on the podcast.
He had a decent
I would say at the start of the season he was pretty locked in as an off-ball defender. I remember him jumping the passing lanes a lot more. I will say as the season started, approaching the trade deadline, we started heading towards All-Star break, I think the wheels fell off a little bit in terms of his defense.
Yeah, I think attention, everything pretty much fell off. But yeah, we replaced him with Kyrie Irving, who I think to me is an absolute 100% positive. I think that there was some arguments there within the Mavericks community, just kind of not knowing, again, Kyrie's game. But he does bring a little bit of defense, and not just a little bit. I think he had actually a pretty big defensive impact, which is a lot saying for how awful this team was defensively throughout the whole entire year. But I think his ability, whether one-on-one, I know he was stuck on some mismatches sometimes. That's where we kind of saw his defensive liability really on full effect. But one-on-one, with this sort of matchup, I think he played really good defense. I think he averaged a full maybe steal, maybe even almost like 1.3 steals or something like that. I'm not quite sure. We don't have the stats right in front of us, but I do know that he averaged over a steal, especially in his time in Dallas, per game. And I think that, just having that sort of effect on how awful this defense was immensely huge. And to me, it seemed like anytime he was on the floor, the defense wasn't at a total utter sort of rush or a total utter sort of collapse. I think that there was some sensibility there, but again, this team was so bad defensively that there's probably not many good numbers that'll back my sort of statement up. But I think, personally, I think Kyrie brought a lot better defense compared to what Spencer Dinwiddie did. And I think we can continue through next season, assuming he resigns, to see a pretty good defensive incline, especially assuming this team gets a lot better defensively. And that's probably a big if right now. But assuming they make the right moves and, they get a coach at the assistant level, I think that we could definitely see an upgraded defense and him probably being that number one point guard in that defensive scheme.
Yeah, no, I think you summed up Kyrie's, effect on both sides of the ball pretty well there. I think what stuck out to me most was probably just the gravity that he's accumulated in terms of, how much attention defenses pay to him. Having a guy of his caliber, I really didn't understand, I think, going into it, just how insane and how much he has to work just to get to his spot, especially with the amount of blitzes that he, faces in pick and roll scenarios. It's different from Luka because, if Luka gets blitzed, he, has that 6'7", 6'8" frame to be able to see over people and kind of dictate how the possession goes by, moving it to a certain point on the court, or, swinging a cross court pass, or, being able to split the defense and get the ball out in a pick and roll. Kyrie, on the other hand, is almost just a masterclass of like dribbling and being able to, diagnose what the defense does and then do something, more athletically off of that,
Absolutely.
compared to Luka. And I mean, I think that's, the superstar effect that I was, most, just in awe of when, you're talking about one of the point guards, probably the best handles in the NBA of all time, in Kyrie Irving, a guy like that. And his ability to just, know when to reject screens. He always essentially makes the right read from, a pick and roll perspective on what to do in a possession. He's really good at cutting. I didn't know how much he holistically affected the game. I knew that, he had an insane dribble drive game. He could make pull-up threes and stuff like that. And he's a really flashy player. But this is a guy that I can confidently say, after seeing him in a Mavericks uniform, is like a complete, like, bought into winning player, would do anything, would sacrifice anything to get his team the win. I did not know how much of, he affected the game on all levels, from his defense, like Jaren mentioned, just being savvy, even if he does have a size disadvantage on guys that he has a size advantage of, he's usually like a pretty haunting defender, and he gets after them easily. On guys that he has a disadvantage of, because he has decent length at his size, but he always has active hands, always really instinctual, trying to poke the ball out of defenders. When they have, the ball in a triple threat or a post position, he really tries as far as he can. And the Mavericks are always running curl offs, staggers, pin downs for him, just to get him going downhill, before he even has the ball in his hands. And I hope to, see them open up the off-ball movement with him a little bit more, because it did get featureized in some games. But, at the beginning of his first few debuts, they didn't really have the time to throw that in the toolbox yet, as well as, his 2-man with Luka game getting opened up. That's something that I look forward to, being put on display a lot more next season if Kyrie is to come back. Because, some of those outlets of offense were some of the definitely like most unstoppable things I had seen in terms of an on-court product ever watching the Dallas Mavericks, because just the attention that you'd see opposing defenses have to pay to those two guys at the same time. You could see the heads turn, and it definitely led to a lot of open baskets. But, the Mavericks were at a place last year where they really didn't have much offensive creation outside of Jaden Hardy, which was, his abilities as a third ball handler, as well as a playmaker. I'm not just talking about strictly his shot creation, but, that is obviously, still kind of a work in progress.
Absolutely.
And, when you have a team of fairly one-dimensional players, especially with Josh Green kind of waning in that ability towards the end of the season, it obviously takes an extreme workload off of a whole offense to have Luka and Kyrie leading the attack. But they never had, a formal training camp to get indoctrinated with each other, nor did Jason Kidd really open the toolbox fully off. I don't know if it was based on the Mavericks playoff positioning, or, if that's just a wrinkle he's waiting to unravel. Hopefully he does this next season. But I mean, they didn't really even scratch the surface of the potential in terms of Kyrie and Luka's off-ball movement and the way they can screen for each other, things of that nature. So just genuinely, after seeing the first 20 games in a Mavericks uniform, just really excited and in awe of how much he affected the game within the margins compared to, I guess, probably what my perception of what, a superstar player, especially a guy that gets persecuted in the national media. You would think that maybe he's a guy who, just comes in and puts on a dribbling show and, then doesn't try on defense and doesn't do a bunch of other things. Yeah. But that perception couldn't be further from the truth after having seen 20 games in a Mavericks uniform. He really performed up to the standard as a 3-level scorer, certified not just 2 to Luka, but 1B.
Yeah.
He literally lived up to it. And despite the end of the season that the Mavericks had, he definitely gave me hope going forward if they are to build a better roster around these two, as Kyrie's in his late prime here, that the Mavericks could really make something happen, because that's just a very hard ebb and flow and dynamic to stop on offense when you have those guys being able to dissect opposing defenses, just as knowledgeable and savvy as they are with the basketball in their hands.
Absolutely. Will, I know this is a little different from like the sort of questions that we've been asking, but to me, I think we've seen it already a little bit with this whole sort of LeBron saga, everything like that. But I guess my question to you, Will, is, we talked about the on-ball stuff that sort of he brings and sort of the effects that he brings and positively manners. I guess, off the court, I think what can he bring to this Mavericks team that pretty much, hasn't ever been offered? Like I have my answer in mind. I'm pretty sure we probably have the same answer, but off the court, I think what can Kyrie offer that he necessarily can't do on the court?
Well, obviously, Kyrie is definitely an ambassador of sorts to the game of basketball, and he is going to be able to we've already seen as good as some of the Mavericks players already are from this perspective, with guys like Dwight Powell, being leaders in the community. Kyrie is a pretty noted donator to things of that sort, and is very proactive in terms of trying to uplift people as well as the community. Maybe some people don't agree with some of his mental statements and all of his woke stuff that he posts on Instagram. I personally maybe more aligned with some of that stuff than other people, but I do think that the centripetal message of positivity that he tries to spread, first of all, amongst fellow teammates, will definitely be met with open arms and positive receptivity. And in tandem with that, and kind of just by virtue of that, he's obviously built a lot of great relationships with players across the league, and that's going to open the door in terms of recruiting, making Dallas an A-list free agent destination going forward, as well as somebody to trade with. And his relationship with Nico Harrison, obviously since Kyrie started at Nike, was something that had been developing, even though he's no longer there. Of course, Nico isn't either, so I don't think that there's a bridge burn there of course. And the Mavericks have been very transparent with Kyrie in terms of trying to curate his lifestyle in a Mavericks uniform, just focusing on basketball, being a professional, and then he can spread whatever other messages he wants to off court. And I have been fairly pleased with how the Mavericks handled that situation. There have been some people in the Dallas media that have kind of been teeter-tottering on that line, but I think in a media market like Dallas, comparable to like New York or Los Angeles, you're going to get a lot more questions and things that are going to be conducive to the on-court product and the actual basketball, and not having to deal with some of the just overarching questions that Kyrie may get asked about, that have to deal with his past, or maybe just kind of ill timing, or maybe, albeit even from his perspective, just a little unfair, even if some of the people in media don't look at it that way. I think that will that did help. I think his mental standpoint is just overall enjoyment from the basketball perspective, and I hope that the Dallas media continues to operate with those kind of things in mind, because I do think that definitely kind of helped him enjoy his stay more a little bit here. Now, if he does do something off the court that constitutes questioning, then I do think it's the media's job to be critical in those instances. But just the warm receptivity in the midst of him not really having any off-court troubles at the time that he got to Dallas, because I wouldn't say that he had. That's a interest. I mean, he didn't really have any off-court troubles that were concurrent at the time of Dallas, that were still ongoing, or still being kind of that weren't already dealt with in some sort of form or fashion. So from that perspective, I think that'll help him. And obviously the recruiting aspect with other players and stuff around the league, the notoriety that the Mavericks will have as a franchise will just increase just by him being here, and the respect that they'll get from a national media perspective and from other players across the league, I think will increase tremendously, especially after multiple players in post-game pressers from opposing teams last year, countless times would just talk about how easy it was to just walk into the paint against the Mavericks and how they had no rim protection. Maybe that still may be the case if they somehow don't handle the business this offseason, but at least there's another added layer of respect there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I was going to pretty much second everything that you said there, especially the recruiting aspect. I think that, Kyrie's relationships that he has built over the last few years has definitely sort of led way to the possibilities of what the Mavericks could do this offseason, potentially future offseason, depending on what Kyrie chooses to do. I think that's pretty much said it there. But yeah, I mean, I think that, Kyrie's ability to have these relationships definitely benefits the Mavericks immensely. Him either being able to recruit or just having, good relationships with people off the court. I think that that's really beneficial for any franchise for that matter. But especially the Mavericks here, because again, we are a Mavericks podcast. We are fans of the Mavericks, and I think it's really important to sort of talk about that and the sort of off the court benefits that Kyrie does bring. Because I feel like whenever it comes to off the court things, you think of Kyrie Irving as a very negative whenever it comes to that aspect, just because of the national narrative of what they've kind of built up through him over the last few seasons. But I definitely second what you said, and I think I'm really looking forward to what he could potentially do over the next few off seasons with potentially bringing in guys. And who knows, maybe he even brings in an assistant head coach here, because we're having a big problem there. But who knows, there's a lot of possibilities to be said, a lot of possibilities to be had as well. And I'm interested to see what sort of route happens and what sort of route could possibly be available with him in this sort of roster, I guess.
No, yeah, I would definitely second you on that. Is there anything else that you would like to note in terms of Kyrie's game? I know that we maybe necessarily didn't get into the intricacies of how he's able to dissect opposing defenses, with his dribbling, but I mean, a lot of it's just so self-explanatory when you watch some of these games.
Yeah.
But we got into a lot of like just the sort of ancillary stuff that he does that nobody talks about in terms of his rebounding, in terms of his defense, things of that nature. And I mean, the guy is just such a, he's just such a one-stop shop for buckets, man. I mean, his ability to just play anybody one-on-one. He's like the ultimate like one-on-one basketball player and get a mid-range jump shot off. Things like that matter. I mean, I've always wanted the Mavericks to get a certified number 2. I didn't know if it would be somebody as so substantial, of Kyrie Irving's pedigree, a guy that I would classify as that, that pure like 1A tier, a guy that can get you a bucket in the playoffs, in the toughest spot of the floor, in the mid-range, fading away when it matters. There are only, a select few players in this day and age in the NBA that would be delegated to even take shots like that, like a pull-up mid-range, or just as, as uncommon as those are, especially in the waning moments of games. And, I'm going to go ahead and segue that into the whole clutch conversation, just because I know that was a big talking point this year. I do think, obviously Luka and Kyrie had a few of those clutch time woes last year, but it never seemed as, they also, at most junctures, a lot of it was just by some malpractice in terms of the play design, and a few out of timeout scenarios where they weren't able to succeed in those. And, a few other times, it was honestly pretty good looks.
Yeah.
Just you could debate on who should have took the shot between the two based on who was having a better game. But I mean, I think that a lot of that was also that sort of end of season sort of, just dread by Mavericks fans. They kind of had a sort of existential dread once bad things started happening, that things just started kind of to culminate on top of each other. And I think people got a little, overly, aggressive in terms of talking about those last scenarios of the game, because, there's a whole other game to talk about, in regards to how the Mavericks had lost some of those games. But look, I mean, the Mavericks clutch time woes were not something to be completely undermined, especially between Luka and Kyrie. But the pedigree that they have, especially with Kyrie, I mean, making one of the most clutch shots of all time, and the relationship that they, have started to forge in Dallas with Kyrie, one of his first weeks there, inviting all of his teammates over to his home to see him and his wife and his kid, after having just moved to a new city. Even if they're not like the best of friends, these guys all like each other, respect each other as professionals. I don't think that there's any sort of issue that's persisting there. I do think that is something, as great as those players are, I just don't think, it won't get solved next year.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that's probably a good segue point into sort of our other talking points. Again, I don't know how much this sort of
applies.
Applies
We definitely
because
kind of got the
yeah.
bulk of the episode in terms of like talking about Kyrie's play and all the off court stuff, but we are going to fall. This is kind of what I did. You weren't there, of course, for the Luka season review podcast. I just kind of talked ad nauseum about how great he is for like 45 minutes, and then I just like went down the script for the rest of the player profile. So we are still gonna still have that continuity with our player profiles where we technically kind of talked about Kyrie's strengths and weaknesses, even though it was for a pretty long period of time. We'll still talk, of course, about the biggest improvements and stuff, but we have talked about the main things, of course, in this podcast. So this is obvious. This segment is obviously going to be, I'm not going to say glossed over upon, but it's going to be a little bit more to the point.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, some of these are not as applicable because we didn't really get to see a whole bunch of Kyrie in Brooklyn. So we'll try our best though. Jaren, what would you say Kyrie's biggest improvement from previous year is? You can say anything. It doesn't have to be on the court, whatever.
Yeah, well, I mean, mine is going to be availability on the court. I think that Kyrie's ability to be healthy, and again, he didn't play every game that he was available in Dallas. There was a few games, whether it be late in season or even injury for that matter. I believe it was a right foot or something like that, if I remember, or left foot.
Mm-hmm.
That kept him out
soreness,
of the game. Yeah.
But given it was just soreness, I'm happy now. I think with the offseason that should be something that's meant.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. But I think just availability. I think that's probably his biggest improvement. I believe the year previous he had only played 40, maybe 50 games in a Brooklyn Net uniform, and I believe this year as a whole he played 60.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was a availability of 28 or 30 games that he could have played as a Maverick, and he played 20 of them. So that's a good 2/3 of the games that he could have played, and he did play in. So yeah, I think that's probably my biggest, and I know that's probably not the biggest sort of standout. I'm sure there's a lot of other people that could be like, oh well, his ability to get to the rim and his ability and efficiency sticks out most to me. But I think because again we didn't watch him last year at a full sort of diagnostic, or at least I don't even think I watched 20 Brooklyn Net games last year. Mm-hmm. So from that standpoint alone, I think to me his biggest improvement was definitely availability, being on the court and being healthy.
Yeah, I would definitely second that. I'm not even going to try to venture outside into finding another answer, because Kyrie's availability with the Mavericks, I think, was also kind of conducive to how the Mavericks are treating the situation, or at least the way that we hope they're treating this situation, which is, let the, you come in to work for us at, basketball, on a professional level. But, otherwise, you're free to push whatever other message you want off the court. And, so long as you're not, attacking any, groups or individuals, and your message is positive, even if it's obscure to some other people, like, go for it. And, I don't want to say that the Nets didn't let him do that, but I do think that he faced a lot more persecution from media upon certain things like that. And, he had times, especially amidst like the whole COVID and some of the, racial outcry that happened in that 2020, 2021 sort of time period. Obviously I think it kind of, for a guy that's, as in tune with his surroundings and, just the sort of political happenings of America, more specifically, on a social level, I think Kyrie, definitely veered away from basketball. And, as an individual, as an adult, I think that the Mavericks, need to go into this with the prerequisite that, hey, if something, does require your attention that's away from basketball, and it's, during the regular season, and you earnestly, feel like you can't focus on basketball for X amount of time or whatever, just grant him that leave of absence instead of having, a contesting sort of nature, or there being, certain members, pop up that, within the organization that don't like it. It just seemed like there was like stuff like that, at least in the water, potentially happening in Brooklyn, the sort of aura, behind having James Harden there, as well as Ben Simmons and Kevin Durant. It was just a lot of drama, a lot of spotlight. I think in Dallas, Kyrie's been able to just purely focus on basketball. And I mean, I never felt like the load management he had with us last year was egregious. I mean, it was fairly warranted, especially in some of those other games when they, were resting players and things like that. And, he's 31. He's going to manage his career. If Kyrie plays like 65 games in a year, I'm completely happy with that.
Absolutely.
Like that would be huge. And, that would help us a lot. And he, has to load manage a couple games. Maybe it's a small injury, but, all signs point towards, this being a guy that is fully committed to winning and things of that sort. So, with no, he's obviously, gonna obviously be, in tune, and, he's going to, be concurrent in terms of his dealings with, the social status of, America and other things like that, of course. But I think with some of just the overall craziness that this, country kind of experienced a couple years ago, comparable to, the crazy level that's at now, I do think that things may not be as drastic for Kyrie to, intentionally sit out games or anything like that, compared to a couple years ago. He hasn't showed really any signs of that. And he does just seem fully committed to winning unless, something else is happening to me. I think he took like a game or two off because like his uncle or a close family member had passed away in his time in Dallas, or something like that had happened. But other than that, I think that this is a stage in his career where he is definitely, ready to focus on basketball, ready to put things aside, and sort of find that dichotomy to where he can separate, the two entities of basketball and personal life. I think Dallas is a better place to do that than some of the other bigger media markets. And I think availability will, kind of follow with that trend in terms of that being something that, is going to increase at a little bit of a better rate for him next year, if I had to predict something.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Yeah. I definitely agree with what you said. I mean, we pretty much shared the same sentiment there.
Yeah.
I think moving on to this next sort of question, I think we went back in time. Now we're going to go a little bit in the future. What do you think has to be the biggest improvement that he has to make either over this offseason or over the next year? Or at least what in your opinion has to be the biggest improvement in his game?
No, I mean, this is obviously directly involved with him, but it's not something that's technically something that he's been delegated to handle. And I would just say opening up the two-man game with Luka a little bit more. When we asked this question, or I guess I asked myself this question in the Luka podcast, it was pretty easy to kind of point towards the conditioning or, just improving a little bit better as a shooter for Luka. Because that's something he can kind of, but, Kyrie at his size does not have many holes in his game, if any. Yeah. And it's really hard to, he's been fine tuning all the intricacies of his game for years now. But if I did have to say something on court, it would probably be more so in how he's used. And I don't know how much of that is up to him. But just in the way that the Mavericks could open up things, using him off ball a little bit more, running, some stuff to get him downhill a little bit better. Maybe pop some, setting some, back screens, some UCLA screens, really opening up the offense, as well as like getting more directly involved with Luka in the middle of the floor. I'd like to see that. Maybe if I wanted to really hit the hammer on the head, I could say, especially just kind of depending on the personnel Dallas brings in this offseason. If Kyrie could open up the playmaking a little more at certain junctures, or, I think this is a good one now that I think about it, because I know a lot of fans were calling about this, but maybe to be a little more aggressive throughout, substantial parts of the game, versus, only turning it on in the fourth quarter. We've seen him do that through large stretches of his career, but I do think that there was a little bit of a shock factor when he first got to Dallas, where he wasn't being as aggressive as he could have been for the first few games. But then, towards the latter half of his time here, maybe I'd say the last it could be his time here, but last 5 or 10 games, I think that was, did a fairly quick 180 in terms of his offensive output and, how hard he was trying to find his own shot. I think that was only maybe a little micro narrative that persisted there, but I mean, that's something that he could maybe do a little bit better on, but a lot of that's also getting, adjusted to a new environment and new guys and a new team. So if I had to pick something, it'd be maybe a culmination of all that, but none of it's so substantial as to undermine the amazing player that, he is.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think we pretty much second. I mean,
you can
share that same.
Yeah.
I mean, the only other two things that I would highlight, again, I mean, his sort of, as you mentioned, his sort of off-ball ability. I think if he could work on his sort of effectiveness off ball, whether it be cutting, constantly moving, doing like sort
Yeah,
of
but like I said,
type.
he's good at he's very
Yeah,
good
very
at
good at yeah. And
it's
that's the
just
thing.
that,
It's
yeah.
like if you're wanting to fine tune anything, find some sort of
Yeah.
very little sort of knack in his game. It would be that. And again, he played with LeBron. He played with Kevin Durant. Like he's played with the greats. Luka Doncic now. Like I think he's figured out a good sort of formula, a good rhythm whenever it comes to off-ball movements. But again, I think if you could formulate or fine tune, I guess I should say, anything offensively, it'd probably be that. And defensively, for me, I think it'd probably be sort of his switchability. I felt like at times, even though he's an aggressive defender, he's really handsy. I don't feel like he was backing down at any point. I do feel like, however, there was a few points against sort of taller guys or guys with bigger figures that would sort of back him down with ease. And again, I know he's a
He would
smaller
kind of
guy.
concede in some of those scenarios.
Yeah, but that's the thing is, the effort sort of lacked there in certain scenarios. So to me, I think if he could sort of work on his switchability on defense, that would probably improve a lot.
But as a guy that's like 31,
yeah, exactly.
You can pull any excuse in the book for all this sort of stuff, but if we're just like having to pick something, this is what we're talking about. But yeah, I mean, Kyrie just as a player, I mean, one of the reasons that, I think what kind of just makes him so great is that he's like one of the best players in NBA history in terms of being a guy that does not need a play called for him in terms of, just getting you a shot. He's one of the best at that. But in tandem with that, he's so good at, like when they run plays for him, off those curl offs and staggers. And that's why he's such a fascinating player to cover, to see the dichotomy between that and just how, widely effective he can be used in all areas offensively, as can Luka. It just thinking of it, does make me, start salivating at the mouth sometimes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I've been getting kind of excited all podcasts. No, I can't cap. The vibes are good, comparable to some of the, other player profiles we've done, as well as, the
Justin Holiday
existential Mavs offseason dread. This is definitely feeling a little more jovial,
a little more lighthearted. I definitely agree. I think that definitely wraps that up. And I guess we'll go ahead and let's move on to our sustainability rating. So 1 out of 10. Do you want me to explain this? Okay. So 1 out of 10, of course, 1 being worse and 10 being great. I would go with we'll go with a 9 with Kyrie, because again, I think that there is a chance I think there's a chance where, he could possibly, go somewhere else this offseason. But again, I'm very likely that, or I guess I'm very on the likelihood that he will stay. He will sign with Dallas. And again, I mean, there is that very small scenario. Maybe it just doesn't work out. And maybe he finds a new home a few years later. But again, I think that's a very unlikely scenario. And I'm at the point in especially this podcast where I'm feeling pretty good about Kyrie Irving coming back. And I think that's why I'd stick it at a 9. I guess let me do my Luka one real quick. I know it's a little late, but we'll go with the 10 with Luka. So
okay, that's I think that I did also. No, I think I went ahead and said a 10 for now on Luka, and then I kind of talked about in how future years that could end up changing a little bit. Yeah, especially next up. But I said for right now, for a 10, I would be in agreement with you there. For Kyrie, I'm gonna veer away a little bit from what you said, Jaren. As happy as I've been this podcast, and as much as I've been forecasting the on-court product that is the 2-man game between Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, and the excitement of the Mavericks actually potentially righting the wrongs of past off seasons, with the blessing down from the basketball gods at this number 10 pick, and some other things they could do this offseason. I still have a bad taste in my mouth from this Jalen Brunson situation. And as volatile as Kyrie's been throughout his career, he's a very even keel, level headed, woke sort of guy, right? But I as much as he loves it here in Dallas, I don't think that I think he is the type of guy to be able to put emotions aside and be like, oh, like this might be best for me, and do some sort of ploy there. So there obviously is some sort of outlying fear that he may leave. I'm not totally negligent of that. I do think that it's at least better than a slight chance. But I do think all signs point towards Dallas having majority rule in this instance. So I'm going to go ahead and say about a 6.8 is my sustainability rating.
Okay. That's I think that's probably the biggest point of margin that we've had this whole entire time. And of course, it comes in the last podcast. So our player profile podcast. Yeah. We'll go into the surprising stat. And to me, we
found this one together, Jaren.
Yeah, we did find this one together.
Let's go. That was cringe. That was cringe. That was really cringe.
I look again. I mean, bring this back to the podcast. Bring this back to basketball. I think that this stat is only indicative of what kind of player Kyrie Irving is.
We wanted to find something to highlight how good he was because me and Jaren, some of these surprising stats, we tried to sort of lead a narrative with them, right? And for a lot of the players, we try to especially the younger players, we try to find something they can improve upon or what they could do better. With Kyrie, it's just across the board, just good, even in most of these advanced categories. So we ended up landing on his field goal percentage when he's, tightly contested is what NBA.com would define as very tight, within 0 to 2 feet, essentially when a defender is draped all over you. It is only, 6% of the shot selection this past year in terms of his shot diet. But, at the volume that, the scoring that he does within 60 games, comparable to other guys in the league, that is a fairly, solid margin that he may have ahead of those guys in terms of the actual amount of data that we can apply in this instance, right? So he ended up having a 53%.
52.9, but 53.
I was intentionally rounding, Jaren, but thank you.
0.9 for both of these, but we're rounding up. So.
Okay. All right, Jaren. All right, so yes, Kyrie had but now that Jaren's prefaced it, I'm just going to go ahead and say he had a 53% field goal percentage in instances where he was, completely tightly contested within 0 to 2 feet. Within 0 to 2 feet, a 55% straight up percentage from 2-point range.
Yes.
And I didn't look at I don't think it had the exact distance of shots and all that sort of stuff. I wasn't able to find that data, but just because we were already, categorizing it by how contested these shots are. But from 3-point range with defender, tightly contested on him within 0 to 2 feet, Kyrie Irving this past season shot, as Jaren would say, 42.9, basically 43% from 3. So those are obviously insane figures. Those are good for wide open shooters, in the NBA, especially that 3-point percentage. It really does go to show how just dynamic he is. I mean, this is a guy that was in the 3-point contest last year. The degree of difficulty in some of the shots that he takes, and how he has to sort of will the way to the will some of these Mavericks offensive possessions. Is just wildly impressive to see, especially with all the attention he draws. I really don't know if there's any other player on the Mavericks, even Luka, that could hit the degree of difficulty of a lot of these Kyrie shots. Now, Luka, I think, has the body type to be able to, I'm not comparing player wise, not saying that Luka's worse, but he does have the body type and he does have a little bit of a physical advantage to put him in some more advantageous scenarios comparable to Kyrie. Kyrie, I mean, some of the degree of difficulty on, these heavily contested shots from bigger defenders that, have their wingspan can be, a lot more effective on, his shot comparable to, a bigger ball handler like Luka. It just, that's the Shat. Oh my God, I almost said Shat. That would have been bad. But I said it anyway. So if you're listening this far in the podcast, you can go ahead and relish in that. But that stat really goes to encapsulate just how, the degree of difficulty of Kyrie shots and just how locked in as a scorer he is. I mean, you tend to, imagine if Kyrie was being spoon fed some of these looks like Reggie Bullock. I mean, he'd be shooting God knows what from 3, but
23%.
You said 23%
For Reggie.
No, Reggie. I was talking about what Kyrie would shoot if he was getting these.
I thought that you were making a.
Oh no, yeah, I was, but it was how much better Kyrie.
He was shooting 65%.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And so now you get the train of thought. But I mean, Kyrie was in the 3-point contest at one times. I know he's obviously, I would say, a little bit of a better pull-up shooter, but all these guys that make these high degree of, pull-up jump shots that are tightly contested. I mean, they're always going to be just completely solid when nobody's on them. I maybe from 3-point range that wanes off a little bit, but Kyrie, I think, would still, even if his role in the NBA was to be just a complete catch and shoot shooter, I think he could easily have molded his game into Lou Williams style. If he if he just wanted to like do that in his career, because he's that good. If he was just, I think maybe the only reason Kyrie's shooting even falls off to where it does, I would reckon, is honestly just because of game legs, getting tired later in games, things of that nature. But I mean, that just goes
the degree of difficult.
Kind
of shots he's taking. So comparable to the shots that Reggie Bullock's taking. So
I know exactly, but I mean, that just goes to show, as good as these guys in the NBA are, how much of a skill gap there can be even between certain players. Yet, if you put Reggie Bullock against any of us, he would completely
he would sauce us.
Yeah, he would absolutely just demolish us. So that is that's my little spill for the day. Probably said a little bit too much about the surprising stat, Jaren, but it was so good, and we did it together. we had to really relish in that. But it's been a fun podcast. Glad to really cover the surface on some of those rumors in terms of the whole LeBron saga and get out the player profiles. We're finally done, Jaren. Ready to focus on draft profiles. Do you feel validated at the end of this now, Jaren?
I absolutely do feel validated. It took us a long little bit to get.
There were a lot of errors, a lot of Twitter hackings,
shout out to the
conversations with Elon Musk.
Absolutely, yes, on the phone,
and we somehow made it here. So
we did make it here.
We can give ourselves a B- for that.
Let's give a little pat on the back.
We'll give ourselves a B-, maybe a C+ for that, but. Other than that, this has been the Mainstream Mavs podcast. We're excited to turn out more draft content for you guys in the coming days and weeks as we lead up to the draft. It's an exciting time.
Maybe a potential LeBron trade.
Yes.
Who knows?
Yeah. One of our next podcasts, we got player profiles coming out for a few players that we'll announce. We'll get out tomorrow. We're also going to do a podcast based on what the Mavericks can do with the 10th pick, the options that they have. Been wanting to go fully in depth into that, and then we'll just kind of keep turning things out. But, in terms of catching up on news, getting the player profiles done, definitely excited to get this one out, distribute to everybody out there. And every time I talk about Kyrie ad nauseum, on an elongated sort of segment, I always end up just realizing how much more insane of a basketball player he is. Would be probably in my summation to the
That's
podcast.
Why my sustainability rating was an absolute 9. So because over this 50 possible 40, we don't know how long this podcast is going on, but over this sort of segment, I've realized how amazing Kyrie is, and I always knew that. But it's always nice to get talked about him. So
yes, of course. But barring that, guys, we appreciate you guys for listening this far on the podcast. Make sure if you haven't already to go follow our new Twitter at Mainstream214. We're updating that and getting all this content out on there. You can see it everywhere. We're going to be trying to follow back a bunch of you guys, so make sure to get at us so we can get back to where we were at and hopefully continue to expand and grow forward. Make sure to follow us on YouTube, or subscribe rather, at Mainstream Mavs Podcast. You can follow it, just literally search it up. Turn on post noties if you're a real one like that. If you want to see everything drop, we would really appreciate that. And comment down below, what do you think Kyrie Irving's biggest offseason expenditure is going to be this season? Do you think he may take a detox from social media for 3 weeks? Is he going to try to aid Somali pirates? Comment it down below. He could be doing a wide array of things to try to help the whole world out this season. He's that type of woke individual.
Absolutely.
And we would welcome him doing so. We would in fact join him, wouldn't we, Jaren?
Well, I think we would.
So you can look forward to that. Perhaps Kyrie vlogs may come out this summer if we really are. Me and Jaren, there's an off chance we pop out to Summer League with I guess I can say it on the podcast because I doubt any of them are listening. We're not famous enough, but the Papado Emergency Fund.
Oh, wow.
Because me and Jaren both work at Papado's. For those of you that don't know, if you ever need to catch a to-go order,
18347 Dallas Parkway.
18349, Jaren.
Oh, 349. My fault. I messed it up.
If you guys ever want some free food and you say you're a listener of the Mainstream Mavs podcast,
absolutely,
we will hook you up with some delicious Papado's food. Just make sure to hit us up first. We if you catch us off guard, might be a bad time. But anyways, we have some emergency funds split up there. Just perhaps if the off chance happens that we're able to make it to Vegas for Summer League, catch a quick tidbit from Kyrie coming to see some of the Mavericks young players. Yes. Maybe not the number 10 pick because that's in all likelihood probably going to get traded. But you never know. Given the situation that could pop up. I think that honestly, if I had to guess on the 10th pick,
Are we going to the guessing game right now?
No, this is going to be a quick guess before the podcast ends. I think with the 10th pick, while I do think it is going to get traded in some sort of form or fashion, I don't think that they're going to do what they did last year in terms of trading the pick days ahead. I think that they're going to let, evaluate the landscape. And and I think that it would be it would be one of those trades that gets announced like right before the pick happens, like where they trade back, where they make a trade. I'm feeling a draft day trade. I'm feeling the excitement in the air. That's why you're going to need to follow the Mainstream Mavs Twitch as well. Once we make that,
yes, absolutely.
that is in the works. But if we were able to get some vlogs going with Kyrie, that would be a best case scenario. But sometimes we have to wander off into happy land, especially during these off-season podcasts, because me and Jaren were doing God's work for you guys those last few games. Still talking about it, go on and talk about that for an hour is, not a pleasant experience. And, you wouldn't wish that upon other people. So, we would appreciate your sentiments in terms of letting us, wander off into our imagination sometimes here as we do in these latter segments of the podcast. But otherwise, make sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast. We're on almost every podcast platform in terms of listening, whether it be Amazon Music, Google Podcasts. You can kind of find us just anywhere. So with whatever your podcast device has you do in terms of subscribing or following us, make sure to do that and leave a review, give us a good rating. If you are a loyal fan of the pod, we'd really appreciate that. That would mean the world to us. Other than that, Jaren, I'm trying to think if I have anything else to plug. The TikTok?
The TikTok, yes.
Jaren has been delegated to running the TikTok. He's going to be clipping certain stuff from the YouTube podcast, putting it up there. So obviously that's more of an outreach thing to try to gain new listeners. But we would appreciate if you guys would follow us at Mainstream Mavs on TikTok. You can find us there. We have like 2 or 3 videos right now. So most of them
former games.
Yes, I think one of them is kind of funny.
Yeah, one of them is kind of funny.
Yeah, so with the me holding the dog in the air with the Kyrie pictures when he got traded, that was a funny one. So, we do appeal to the new generation a little bit. Even though I did look at our podcast statistics the other day, and the vast majority of them are actually 35 to 44-year-old individuals. So the fact that they appeal to some cocky, arrogant, dumbass young individuals like ourselves, really, that definitely captured me, Jaren.
It makes me feel good. Makes my heart very warm. And shout out to all y'all. Y'all old heads whooped us in 24 the other day. So shout out to y'all. But
and they also probably whoop us on our Mavs knowledge.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
We just they probably have shut off their maybe that young sort of hopefulness. Us conversely, we just have a fault. No, my gosh. We have false hope that we can make it. Yes. So that's why we're shooting for the stars right now. But we do appreciate you guys for listening. This has been the Mainstream Mavs podcast. A little longer today, but what's a podcast if we don't go overboard, Jaren?
Oh, it's not a Mainstream Mavs podcast if that's not the case. So
that's right. The only Mavericks podcast that goes above and beyond at any hour.
If we're predicting 40 minutes, it's going to be an hour. The only Mainstream, or
the only Mavericks that consistently goes over. The only Mavs podcast that consistently goes over. All the rest of them probably, I would say, go under more often.
Way more often.
Yeah. All right, but we will catch you guys in the next one.
Bye-bye.